All right. Um, Blessings to everybody. I am Christ I am disciple, and we're doing a stream right now. It's a little bit later than I said. I said I would start a stream somewhere around 10. We're doing this at 11:12, and as the title tells you, we're examining DC Blups and how the executives contributed to that, and also why Warner Brothers Discovery needs to be, the executives need to be cleaned out. Almost all of them. I think the only exceptions to the rule, I think, would be Abdi and DeLuca. But most of the executives in Warner Brothers, and this has been an endemic with executives, but most of them need to go, and specific names of executives need to not have the kind of control they have over the creatives in the studio and what's going on in the studio, even though they're no longer there. So we're going to talk about that and much more in this segment. Maximum amount of time, already a minute and 29 seconds in, that we're going to do with this segment is going to be maximum 30 minutes. So you can time me on this. First, I want to start off, I always do, I'm going to start off with some scripture. It's the same scripture I did on my sister channel, What You Need. It comes from Psalms 20, and it's 2 verses 1 and 2. In times of trouble, may the Lord respond to your cry. May the God of Israel keep you safe from all harm. May he send you help from his sanctuary and strengthen you from Jerusalem. Now, this is taken from Psalms 20, 1 and 2. And it's a prayer that I prayed to the Lord early today on behalf of other people. We're not perfect people, but as I saw something on Greg Silverman's Twitter, kindness and love goes a long way. And these are actually very strong things. All right, the first thing we're going to do is examine the DC flops that have happened in DC. We're also going to talk about who's responsible for these flops happening. We're also going to talk about Justice League 2017 and Suicide Squad, which was really, those are the first two films, and I'm talking about Suicide Squad 2016. Those were really Studio Squad, they call them. I call it. Those were really the two films that they started doing their pivot with. Warner Brothers Studios started doing their pivot with, and we'll talk about that. And then the last thing we'll talk about is what we, as the fandom pushing for Restore the Snyderverse, can do in this moment and in this atmosphere. So we're going to talk about all of that within 30 minutes. Now, some of the things we covered in the last 3-hour stream with Leroy Kong, we're not going to go over here, but some of it we're going to go over here and elaborate on, particularly when we talk about the executive arm of Warner Brothers Discovery, which is what its new incarnation is called. Okay, so we'll do that. The other thing is, if you want to join as a guest, all you have to do is click, not clink, but click the link that you see there. I'm going to keep it on the screen so people can see it, and you just go into the chat area, click on that link, and you can join as a guest if you so wish. All right, I do have to eat something, so I may just start eating in the middle of the stream, or I may not. Okay. And as we get guests on here, I'll let the guests talk, and you can talk as much as you want. Even if you're not pro Restore the Snyderverse, etc., we're going to still discuss these events as they unfold. Let me get down to it. So first things, we're going to examine the DC flops. The most recent two DC flops was the Flash movie, which is flopped, and Shazam, which is flopped. And when we look at early forecast for the box office for Blue Beetle, it looks like Blue Beetle will flop, okay, from all appearances. So that's going to be 4 movies that James Gunn has been overseeing as DC head, which would have flopped under him. Surprise, surprise. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about an examination of these flops. What we've noticed is the first DC flop, I mean proper flop, of course, was Justice League 2017. This was back in 2017. It came at the end of the year. I believe it was November 11th, 2017. Early on that year, it was a great success for Wonder Woman. Particularly, Wonder Woman was written by Patty Jenkins and Jeff Johns. They did a rewrite of Zack Snyder's story concerning that. And then, of course, screenwriters came in and really polished the whole thing up. But that movie was extremely successful. The ending of the movie wasn't that great, but for all appearances, it has been a game changer in comic book movies and in Hollywood, period, because it's the first time really a superhero lead was a woman. And not only that, but just the way how Patty Jenkins was able to convey, you know, women on the screen was just a different way and a different look and a different feel of how it should be done. And it really came across well. She really said that Zack Snyder's story and just different things with Zack Snyder harmonized with what she was doing and just the personality of Zack Snyder. And so she was really happy to be on board for this project. And she really was very successful with that. Now, after that success, you know, the heads of Warner Brothers at the time, the executive heads of Warner Brothers, was Jeff Johns and John Byrne. And we'll go into some more detail about that, but suffice it to say, the genesis of this flopping, the first DC flop in the DCEU came from Justice League 2017. They thought because they were so successful with Wonder Woman tweaking it, and they also had tweaked Suicide Squad, now known as Studio Squad. They also tweaked that. They decided to pivot away from the direction Zack Snyder was going in, the vision that Zack Snyder had. They started to pivot away from that with Studio Squad. That was the first pivot away. So they were going with Zack Snyder and what Zack Snyder was doing, his vision for Man of Steel, and then his vision for Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice. They followed that, even though they did cut the runtime of that movie, and that's all because of Kevin Sujara. But this particular thing with the pivoting away started with Suicide Squad. They took David Ayer's movie pretty much away from him, and then the same executive, Jeff Johns, was on, you know, writing with Patty Jenkins, was able to again pivot somewhat away from what Zack was doing with the story. But most of the integral ingredients of the story, meaning the physicality, the groundedness, etc., of the story, particularly in the beginning, they didn't pivot away from that. The story did have a little humor and so on, but for the most part, and some of it you had to suspend your reality about, but for the most part, the movie was much more grounded. And as a result of that, it really, and then it highlighted, you know, the strong values or virtues that women have that make them why they're so good. And so just seeing the Amazons operate, how they operate, their culture, their lifestyle, and then seeing that Wonder Woman was an extension of that, really made for a revolutionary way of looking at things. And a lot of women, you know, felt well represented. And so Wonder Woman is still, I believe, one of those pivotal times in Hollywood. The Me Too movement came off of it and so many other things. So a really great movie. But coming off of that, Jeff Johns, John Byrne, they were the heads. They were the main executives of DC. They were the DC heads. They started micromanaging Zack Snyder's stuff when Zack Snyder just sleep for pressure on him. Got Zack Snyder out of making his movie and replaced him with Joss Whedon. And they thought this was the prime opportunity to do their major pivot. And they did it, and it flopped. Okay? It was not a success. It failed. Now, I want to say that the failure of this first flop in DC, the very first DCEU flop or DCU flop. I would call it DCEU, even though Jeff Johns and John Berg called it DCU. Very much what James Gunn is now maintaining, showing you that it's the same regime there. This flop would set the tone for what you would see in the future. But suffice it to say, it was so revolting. Trying to rush, the executives trying to rush so they could get their bonuses and so on. It was just ugly. The whole scene is ugly. They treat the creatives terribly. And we still have repercussions from that. We still need a proper investigation. Walter Ahmad still hasn't given an apology to the participants of the investigation. There's been no apology from Warner Brothers, particularly on this issue. They've been unapologetic. Very ugly things happened inside of there. The creators were treated very, very poorly with this new regime. Jeff Johns and John Berg. John Berg is very regretful about it, and he has moved on. But Jeff Johns has issued no apology. And Jeff Johns should have been fired. Joss Whedon took the fall, but Joss Whedon's not the only guy that should have been fired on that thing. But nonetheless, it flopped, and it flopped horribly. Now, after that, you had Aquaman, which was a success, mainly because of Jason Momoa's connection to Zack Snyder and also the release of Snyder Cut movement. And so a lot of Snyder fans supported Aquaman and made that movie a tremendous success, hoping and expecting that Aquaman would be an extension of what the Snyderverse would be, and there'd be a return to the Snyderverse. They were very hopeful of that. But as we see with Shazam, that didn't happen. And therefore, with that disillusionment, we had a series of flops from then on in with the DC. In fact, we've had 6 straight flops now. So the first flop was Justice League 2017. We had 2 pauses where 2 movies made some money. One made a tremendous amount of money, and the second one didn't make as much. And then we just had a series of flops from Birds of Prey all the way down to the present movie that came out, The Flash. So you have to ask yourself now, why has this happened? Well, if you look at all those movies that have flopped, okay, they all have something in common. They all look like Marvel movies. They all have pathos, and they have humor throughout them. Forced humor in certain spots. You can tell that some committee, some guy thought it was funny to put this in or whatever. They also, I find, have an irreverence to the heroes. Whereas Zach and Patty Jenkins, you know, and even David Ayer had a lot of reverence for the Justice League and the heroes and what was a hero and treated it sacredly. There was a total irreverence from Justice League 2017, even Aquaman. The Aquaman film was very irreverent with Aquaman. It was very drunken. He reminded me of the Aquaman from Justice League 2017, to be honest with you. Shazam was a mockery of everything, even though Shazam did have a lot of sacredness and at least the Shazam movie, a lot of respect for the heroes in the movie, which was very good. And that's why still to this day, I'm a supporter of David Sandberg. I think the Shazam movie wasn't that bad. I mean, I still didn't particularly like it and Zachary Levi's interpretation of Shazam, but I must say, David Sandberg did not make a mockery of Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, you know, and them existing in the world. In fact, it is the only DC EU or DCU movie that actually paid respect to Batman v Superman. So I think that that's something worthy that David Sandberg, and I hope when in history, when the dust clears and everything, we get what we want, that we will respect David Sandberg's efforts. I mean, he didn't pick and choose the actors that he had to work with, and Zachary Levi did bring a lot of bad will to the movies that he directed, but the DC movies that he's directed. But you know, unfortunately for him, that he ended up in this political situation, and he was a casualty of it. But you know, David Sandberg, I would love to support that guy and whatever he does from here on in. Even if it's a horror movie, I just go see it just to sort of show him, you know, no hard feelings to you, bro. You know, you're a great director. We like you. We know you were in a situation where you're in a bind. James Gunn made you do this. They made you put certain jokes inside that you didn't probably think personally were funny. So I know it was a bad experience, a bitter taste in your mouth, but bro, we like you and we'll rock with you as a creative. But you notice that all these movies, they decided to make them Marvelize these movies, including Aquaman, by the way, which story was changed somewhat. And we know that James Wan had some discrepancies, disagreements between him and Jeff Johns concerning certain creative decisions. And we see this repeating now with Aquaman 2, where James Wan is very uncomfortable with the reshoots that are being done right now, where James Gunn is trying to get Aquaman to fit into what he wants it to fit as. And this, again, Jeff Johns being there and being a co-writer of Aquaman, whether you like it or not, Jeff Johns is always in the picture, does not do much, does not help the situation either. Now, that's another very important point that we raised, and I spoke with Leroy Kong. Jeff Johns seems to pop up almost all the time as a writer or something when we're dealing with these movies. Birds of Prey, which flopped, guess who was helping the director there? Jeff Johns was there. Wonder Woman 84, who's writing Wonder Woman 84? Jeff Johns is there. The Suicide Squad, even though James Gunn is doing his thing and whatever, you know, you look at that, Jeff Johns is somewhere there. When you look at Black Adam, which flopped, who was the writer? Jeff Johns. When you look at Shazam 2 and even Shazam, the unofficial writer or consultant is Jeff Johns. When you look at, and of course it's a Peter Safran production. When you look at, oh, what's up, Lost and Found? What's up, bro? I don't know. I didn't expect you to be up so late. Shout out to Lost and Found, man, in the building. If you want to pop in here and let people see your face or not and say a couple words, feel free to do so. Well, let me just get to, I only have 30 minutes, but you know, I'm going to do what I can. When you look at Black Adam, like I said, Jeff Johns is the writer there. When you look at the Suicide Squad, like I said before, even though we know that James Gunn is the guy that, you know, James Gunn is the guy that basically, you know, wrote it and everything, Jeff Johns is somewhere in the equation because Jeff Johns, of course, favored, you know, James Gunn coming into the picture as is with Joss Whedon. He wanted Marvel directors there. When you look at Shazam 2, like I said, you know, David Sandberg is supposed to be the guy that's writing, but who's giving him notes? We know James Gunn gave notes. You know, we saw James Gunn's people there that he hired were in the back end of Shazam 2. But to be fair, again, once again, I just want to say, Jeff Johns is somewhere in the background there. When you look at, just look at the Flash movie. Yes, Andy Muschietti is the guy that's supposed to be writing the Flash movie, but you know, the Flash movie has gone through many different incarnations with many different regimes. But at the end of the day, Jeff Johns is somewhere in that equation because we all know Blue Beetle and the jokes that are being thrown in Blue Beetle, which are not funny to anybody. They are more cringe than funny. Again, we know Jeff Johns is somewhere there. And then finally, as if that ain't enough, to close out the series of flops, Aquaman. Who is the writer for Aquaman 2? Jeff Johns, right? So, and Jeff Johns is an executive, and he's executive producer, and he's an executive. So when we talk about executives in DC, and we're examining these DC flops, we see Jeff Johns is appearing in a lot of these DC flops. And that's a commonality you'll find. Jeff Johns is there, okay? Jeff Johns has been there for Green Lantern when it flopped. Jeff Johns was there when Superman Returns flopped. And this is all during the time when Christopher Nolan's movies are doing very, very well, making billions and billions and billions of dollars. We had Batman, we had The Dark Knight, and then we had The Dark Knight Rises, which made billions of dollars. In the meantime, Jeff Johns is constantly making movies flop, DC movies flop. And he's talking about this ideal DC, and this was the perfect DC movie, and the critics are rating these movies very highly, and then they flop. Because Jeff Johns does not know his place. He's a writer, just like Frank Miller and all these other guys. You're a writer. You're not a guy who's supposed to run DC. And there was this rumor, you know, I'm just going to go back in time a little bit. Man of Steel, BVS, Jeff Johns needs to run DC. Well, Jeff Johns has been running DC, people, unofficially. Even though he's not in DC like that, he's running DC. Not only is he running DC, but there's a series of executives, which gets me to my next point. Who is responsible for these flops? There's a series of executives in Warner Brothers, unofficial, who have continuously, generation after generation, been pushing for DC to be a kiddies, sort of cartoonish, funny, kind of fun movies. They've been pushing for generation after generation because they want to sell toys. Okay? They've been trying to sell DC toys. When they don't try, when the executive arm doesn't try to give this kind of version of DC to the public, and when they actually decide to give some substance, as when Christopher Nolan came on board, when Greg Silverman was the executive who was allowing the creative in James Gunn to do his thing. I'm not James Gunn, what I'm saying. Creative in Christopher Nolan to do his thing. Batman actually started to sell toys. Batman became the #1 comic book. I know I said this yesterday, but #1 comic book in the world. And also the Batman merchandise was selling off the shelves like crazy. So the thing that they are striving to do, right, was it got through when an executive gave the creatives the right to do what they wanted to do. Now, I'm not against bright, glowing, sunny movies and movies for families and movies for kids. I'm not against that, but it's just that if you do not understand the audience that comes to see your stuff, the first $1 billion comic book movie was under Christopher Nolan, The Dark Knight. Okay? That movie was not a movie for kids. Okay? It was an adult movie. That's why adults came out to see it. It was very mature themes, grounded, rooted in reality. And it had a theme and it had a message. Okay? And was relevant. That is why a whole bunch of adults came out and watched The Dark Knight. And then The Dark Knight Rises did also very well. Not as good as The Dark Knight. But again, mature themes, some well thought out plan, and Christopher Nolan nailed it. Now, for some reason, the executive arm, well, no, actually, there is a reason. I'm going to give you the reason. I'm not going to say some reason anymore. There's no, I'm not in doubt, and I'm not questioning again what's happening with this executive arm. I'm going to explain to you what's happening, because as the question says, who is responsible for these flubs? I'm going to tell you right now, it's not the creatives. So don't blame the directors. They were taking notes from the executive arm, and the executive arm was messing up their movies. All right? Andy Muschietti had a much better idea of how the Flash was going to be. It was still going to be light. It was still going to have, still going to be funny in some places, because the Flash is a funny character, as Ezra Miller has been established. He would have dialed back on that. He would have linked the Flash to the Snyderverse. Definitely, he would have done that. But the notes that Andy Muschietti got was that, no, there's no such thing as the Snyderverse. Zack Snyder's Justice League is not canon. You're going to have to pull from Justice League 2007, even though it was a flop, ladies and gentlemen. That is the canon. We'll go into how ridiculous this is, but you'll understand in time. He got notes, first of all, from Abdi and DeLuca. Abdi and DeLuca obviously were trying to get the Snyderverse. They were heading towards that direction. I'm not saying that they would have actually done, as even Sil Abdullah would say. I don't think they actually would have ended up with the Snyderverse per se. That is Zack Snyder directing a movie, but they were going to head towards that direction. And the fact that Abdi and DeLuca greenlight Constantine 2, that Keanu Reeves was trying so hard to get, and the fact that they were they stopped production of Batgirl, told me the direction they really wanted to do. They wanted to make quality movies. They wanted to please the audience. They wanted whatever the audience demanded. They wanted to try to head it in that direction. But David Zaslav, he's the guy that said, no, we're pushing towards Marvel. We're trying to do what Marvel's doing. So David Zaslav came in with the same mindset of the very same people that left. Now, I want you to understand why I say I don't blame the creatives. The creatives are hired by the studio to do what the studio wants of them, right? They can't go all Maverick and do what So it's really what the studio, and if the studio is laid out now, you have to understand a couple of things. Scripts for movies are constantly worked on for years. Different people come on, they give their contributions, they leave. Different people come on, they give their contributions. This is why we have Batman Gate right now. And right now, the gentleman, Warznick or Warzak, I think is his name, who is right now in a legal matter with the studio over the studio using his material in Matt Reeves' movie that came out. But the thing about it is the studio borrows different things from different people over time. And so whereas, like, for example, where David Goyer, he did the Man of Steel thing, which was really his original project. But when it comes to Batman v Superman, that is something that basically was in the works since 2001. Okay, that had been in the works for a very, very long time, and different writers came on, and the project was greenlit, and then was canceled, and it just kept on going. And so it's many, many years. It took about 12 years before, or I'm sorry, 15 years or 14 or 15 years before this movie actually. So they went through a number of different writers. Now, what Chris Warzniak is doing is he's saying, no, the story that you did was my story that you took. So he's the creative again being used and not getting compensated for doing what he was doing. So I think that Warzniak, he's right, and that's why he's suing right now on illegal grounds, and he's really got the upper hand right now. And I wish him, like I said, this sound here, I hope he gets protection and he's okay and safe, because these people will kill you if you're getting upper hand. They prefer not to lose their money that way. And we know there's a big strike going on right now. I'm 27 minutes in. Hold me to the 30 minutes. I'm going to try and wrap this up very quickly. So what I'm saying is, this is how they treat the creators. So you cannot blame the creators for this. The people who are overseeing this thing, the people who get the bulk of the money when profits happen in a company like Warner Brothers, the people who actually get paid ridiculous salaries, we're talking like hundreds of millions of dollars in salaries. Their bonuses are like tens of millions to tens of millions, of dollars. These people who get paid the big bucks usually don't want to take the responsibility, nor does the company. So they're getting paid these enormous, just ridiculously non-proportionate sums of money, whereas the creatives who actually generate the product, they're not getting paid anywhere near that. Zack Snyder gets what paid for a movie, maybe get paid like maybe 1.5 million, $2 million for a movie. So it's a work of love with these guys who get paid whatever they get paid. Actors, I mean, the highest paid actor, I think, is Harrison Ford, at least was. Samuel L. Jackson, probably the highest paid actor. These guys don't get more than, if so much, and this is top end, before taxes, $40 million possible. Sometimes the actor gets paid, right? But you have to understand that these studios, when they get a good blockbuster, take for example Aquaman, which made them a ton of money, right? You know that the actors have been paid already. The actors get no cut. They get nothing unless they're executive producers, and if they're executive producers, then they're part of the executive arm of Warner Brothers. They don't get anything unless they're executively produced, and then what they get is crumbs compared to what these executives get. Okay, these executives make a lot of money for doing absolutely almost nothing. All right, and currently in the status of Warner Brothers, so I'm going to say, if anybody has to be axed from those companies, it's the executive arm. They're expendable. If they don't perform, they are supposed to be the people who lose their jobs, but it doesn't work like that in Hollywood. So who is responsible for the flops? Ultimately, these flops fall to the chief executives of DC, and it also falls on the heads of the chief executives of Warner Brothers. Okay. Now, even so, I tried to explain this to Damien Anton Vincent. I'm going to try to explain this to a lot of you guys out there. Okay. I'm just a couple seconds in, so you guys are going to have to bear with me. Give me an extra 10 minutes. Okay. so that you guys can understand. I'm going to move on to Justice League 2017 and Studio Squad, or what I call Studio Squad, which is Suicide Squad 2016. Okay, to try and explain this. The executive arm of Warner Brothers is quite extensive. All right. Why I suggest that Warner Brothers needs to clean house completely is because it's not just Toby Emmerich, it's not just Ann Sarnoff, it's not just Walter Hamada, it's not just Jeff Johns, it's not just James Gunn and Peter Safran. Okay. The mindset of a lot of these people in Warner Brothers is the same. They believe they're anti-fan. So the fans are not right. So that's why they were targeting and attacking Snyder fans out there, particularly the ones on Twitter who are very vocal. And so we are seen as the enemy for some reason, and we are seen as toxic and so on, which is the absolute wrong approach the studio should have to its fans. So there's an antagonism there, and that is shared by a significant amount of executives in Warner Brothers. That's why I said it has a clean house. We need people like Greg Silverman there. We need people like Abdi and DeLuca there. We need people like Christopher Nolan there. We need people like Deborah Snyder there. We need people like Charles Roven there. Those are the kinds of executive arms. Of course, some of the creators are also executives. We have the star of Barbie. What is her name? Please help me out there. Guys who know who the star of Barbie is. I can't remember her name right now. She's also Harley Quinn. She's also an executive. She's a low-level executive, but she's been producing herself. Executives are producers. Executives are sometimes part of the film community. Sometimes they are creatives who have moved up the ranks. Take, for instance, Jeff Johns, who was once the head DC content creator. And now we have Jim Lee, who is the head of DC. He is an executive. It used to be Margot Robbie. Thank you very much. Margot Robbie is the name I'm thinking of. She's also an executive now. She produces all movies and stuff like that for Warner Brothers. So when you get executive credit, it means you're part of the executive. Zack Snyder's an executive, Deborah Snyder's an executive, etc. So when we talk about executives, so you guys will understand, some of them are creatives. Are shareholders. Some are, okay, I don't know what happened there. Sorry about that, guys. Some are from the business community, and they have nothing to do with movies. So there's a certain set of executives who don't know anything about movies. David Zaslav is one of them. He hasn't done anything that has to do with movies. He doesn't understand the movie industry or anything like that. He moved in, and he's pretty much clueless, but he decided to go with Alan Horn, who is a very successful executive. And he put his trust in Alan Horn. Alan Horn put his trust in Peter Safran because Peter Safran had some success. Peter Safran had delays with the former regime. And Peter Safran had a number of movies coming out. Peter Safran hired James Gunn, but really and truly, it was Toby Emmerich that wanted James Gunn. Peter Safran is part of the executive arm that is pushing for DC to be more like the MCU. This is why James Gunn is there. James Gunn is good friends with Kevin Feige, so they're trying to laze that so that eventually down the road, Marvel can cross over with DC. This is the whole idea. Now, where did this come from? No, I'm trying to explain this to you guys right now. So, as you can see here, what does Justice League 2017 and Studio Squad have to do with this? So let me explain. The pivot that the studio did started with Studio Squad. Jeff Johns was the one who was not part of Man of Steel. He was not part of any of Christopher Nolan's Batman trilogy. Okay, Christopher Nolan did not use Jeff Johns. He went with David Goyer, who was a really successful writer for comic book movies and movies in general. he coupled up with David Goyer instead of Jeff Johns. Jeff Johns was nowhere in the picture for his Batman movies. So Jeff Johns wasn't the creative consultant, nothing like that. Jeff Johns completely left out. When Warner Brothers, now Christopher Nolan decided he was going to make a trilogy, and that was it. Okay, so Christopher Nolan's movies made gigahertz of money, whereas the movies that Jeff Johns actually oversaw and actually had, you know, quite a lot of creative control over were Green Lantern and Superman Returns with Bryan Singer. And Bryan Singer is a hell of a director. Those two movies flopped because Jeff Johns, who is just a writer, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, he was the creative consultant for the head creative consultant for DC. Diane Nelson was the president, but he's just a writer, like Frank Miller. Like, you know, he wrote a lot of influential comics, but he's just a writer. Frank Miller's not a guy who's going to say, well, all right, let me run DC. Let me give, you know, let me have the creative control over DC. No, don't do that. He understands his lane. Okay. Todd McFarlane, who is going to make a Spawn movie or whatever, but Todd McFarlane is a comic book writer. He's a comic book writer. Jeff Johns had no business be making movies. No business whatsoever. Okay? That's not his lane. His lane is writing comic books. He's good. He's a decent screenwriter. He can map out a plan and an idea for what you have in your head, but he should not be advising people and trying to tell people what they should do, like how he forced James Wan to put Black Manta into his movie. That's not what he's supposed to be doing. And of course, he would go against the master plan that Zack Snyder had for the Aquaman movie, right? Which was supposed to be more of a Justice League Aquaman movie, which was supposed to come after Justice League. All those plans were abandoned. We were supposed to have a Batman movie in between. Ben Affleck was supposed to do his Batman movie versus Deathstroke. And then we were supposed to have the Aquaman movie. But that didn't happen because Jeff Johns got interfered with it. Let me explain now. Let me back it up a little bit. I might have to take an extra 10 minutes, people. Let me back it up a little bit so you guys can get a better picture. Jeff Johns was not in the picture with Christopher Nolan and his movies. But Christopher Nolan said, I'm only doing 3 Batman movies and that's it. The studio, Christopher Nolan blocked Justice League Mortal from happening because he wanted to finish his story and then he could have the Justice League after. He was smart to do that because it accrued a lot of money. I explained that to Leroy Kong before. In exchange for that, Christopher Nolan brought on a guy who was really good at doing comic book movies, coming off of his Watchmen movie, which got a lot of praise, particularly his extended cut of Watchmen, got a lot of praise. The studio had cut down the runtime of his movie Watchmen. Now, Zack Snyder had mixed success in movie making. His movie Sucker Punch, which was cut down again for runtime, was misunderstood. His Alzagahul, which is great children's movie, was misunderstood. And then Watchmen, which was again cut down for runtime, because Zack makes epics. He doesn't make, he makes epics. And an epic is generally a long movie, but it's fantastic. You can go watch a whole epic and be like, well, blown away. And you're like, wow, I could take on more of this, right? Epics. Watchmen in its the ultimate cut of Watchmen is incredible. It has animation, it has all kinds of things. And Zack is crazy. But anyway, he did not make box office off those 3 movies. He had box office off of Dawn of the Dead. He had box office off of 300 and the 300 sequel. But he hadn't made box office for a while. This is the guy that Christopher Nolan picked to carry out the DCEU. Christopher Nolan didn't mention Jeff Johns in that whole process. Not once. Okay? Because he had David Goyer there. So when Man of Steel critically flopped, this was the opportunity for Jeff Johns to start working his deceitful snakery amongst the executives, because the executives had been following what Christopher Nolan was telling them. Christopher Nolan was saying, follow this. This is the blueprint. Right? Zack is going to carry it out. And so when Zack Snyder nailed Man of Steel, but the critics and the hostility of the then MCU world, because Joss Whedon had just done the Avengers, it was very successful, and behind that came Man of Steel. The Avengers was light, it was colorful, there were no tremendous stakes, there was no repercussions and consequences. It was just a fun dive. My younger brother loved it, and it was entertaining. So when Zack Snyder brought Man of Steel, which was the alternative to the Avengers, which was, and everybody thought it was going to make $1 million. Well, I definitely thought it was going to make $1 billion, because this movie blew my mind when I saw, I thought it was just a usual Superman movie. And then, I told everybody the trailer with, Henry Cavill saying it's not an S on my planet means hope opened my mind, because I did not think of Superman like that. I thought of Superman as a man. I never thought of him as an alien. I never thought of Superman as, that he came from this foreign world where, the glyph on his chest, was a glyph. It wasn't, it wasn't an S, so, that took it to a whole other level. We knew that Superman means hope, brings hope to people and stuff, but I never thought of the S on his chest as, the symbol of hope. The S on his chest meant S for Superman. You know what I mean? So, Zach took it to a whole other level. David Goyer took it to a whole other level. And that depth is what attracted me to DC back again. Because I would look at X-Men and stuff, and they go, wow, you with the special effects and stuff. But now it was going deeper. And that's why, that's what attracted me to DC. And a lot of other people were attracted to DC by the depth. Christopher Nolan always doing deep movies, and now Zack Snyder doing that too. So, because Jeff Johns was not in any of this, Jeff Johns got jealous. He got angry because what he was unable to achieve with his ideals that this is the perfect way to make a superhero movie and so on. Christopher Nolan came in and just blew the lid off the ceiling, and now Zack Snyder was coming in. So Jeff Johns started agitating within the studio executives, pitching his ideas and playing on the executives because they're so naive and so on, playing on their minds with his snakery, playing on their minds that the ideal superhero is this and so on. And he started circulating this throughout the media, and executives started speaking out against Zack Snyder. And one of the guys who aligned with Jeff Johns quite quickly was Kevin Suchiara. So Kevin Suchiara, to put an obstacle in Zack Snyder's way, he, for BVS, the 2 weeks before the release of BVS, he wanted Zack Snyder to cut down the runtime, demanding that. And you have to understand, executives are the people who own, pretty much the studio owns the property, and executives can send notes to you, and then you have to comply with their notes, right? So Suchiara sent a note to Zack Snyder, and the hostility began there. Now, why this is important to understand is because Jeff Johns has been associated with 2 successful movies in DC. Wonder Woman, which he's involved in the writing of it, and Aquaman, which he's involved in the writing of it. In both movies, he changed up the movie so that the movie would not be continuous and flow with what Zack Snyder had. But I want you to understand how this guy wormed his way in, got the executives to turn against Zack Snyder, and because the executives don't know better, and not just him, but it's a series of people. The executive who was in charge of DC on its rise back to prominence and strength was an executive named Greg Silverman. He replaced an executive who was fired from DC after Batman and Robin fell through, and a series of other failures in Warner Brothers. But that executive that was fired left behind executives who had a similar mindset to himself. But they weren't in the majority anymore because executives and Warner Brothers was looking for something so they could make a profit. When Greg Silverman was brought onto the scene, and he brought all of this change and success to Warner Brothers with Christopher Nolan, the executives started to follow what Christopher Nolan was doing and what Greg Silverman was saying. Greg Silverman had promised that BVS, which was announced, and Comic-Con lost their minds, and we all know Marvel changed their whole movie that they were going to make and everything. BVS was about to change the whole game, and did. It still has to this day. People quietly admire BVS while allowing, the clowns out there to bash it. But Nolan was trusted. Zack Snyder had a sort of, hit or miss pass. Jeff Johns knew he couldn't attack Nolan, so he attacked Zack Snyder. And this is how he started to turn the executive arm against Zack Snyder. He got Kevin Tsuchihara on his side because Jeff Johns wanted to take over DC like he had before, and he wanted to run DC, right? And so the media started talking about how Jeff Johns is the man for the job with DC. You started hearing these echoes. This is the things that Jeff Johns was whispering in people's ears. Executive and Warner Brothers putting out press. They started to speak bad about Zack Snyder because his movie critically flopped, even though it made money. And they started taking control away from Zack Snyder. And of course, Christopher Nolan wasn't there to protect him. Christopher Nolan was on another project. And so this is how they gradually started to chip away at what was happening. And again, some of the former executives was from the regime before. Obviously, they wanted to gain back control as well, so they sided with Jeff Johns. So this is how it all began. And Jeff Johns, along with some of the older executives, including Kevin Tsuchihara, was from the regime before, and people from New Line Cinema, they started to come together. So you find that Jeff Johns, after Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, in which Kevin Tsuchihara cut the runtime for it, sabotaging Zack Snyder, and also the executives were pressing Zack Snyder, don't make the movie too dark, blah, 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 blah. So, and the Jeff Johns got somehow the MPAA to rate the movie as rated R, and continuously rated as rated R. So this guy has an influence in Hollywood. He has a lot of ties and influence on a lot of people. It's not just him by himself, okay? So he got these people to turn against Zack Snyder, and by doing so, he was able to get BVS, a lot of heat and pressure was put on it. Of course, this is the same year as Captain America: Civil War, so you got the Marvel fans who are feeling intimidated by it, and they are attacking BVS for no reason. No matter what news comes out, they try to make a negative spin on it. And then Jeff Johns internally is trying to get Warner Brothers and the executives to go against Zack Snyder, and this movie is going to flop. And you heard all these things. Then Jeff Johns, of course, agitated even further, leaking stuff so that Zack Snyder had to put out some things that wasn't there. So it was a lot of attack and vitriol and venom that came against this movie even before it came out. Okay. But the terrible thing about it was an attack within the studio, which Joss Whedon even wrote a Avengers movie on that. Avengers 2 is actually about the sabotage of BVS. That's really what it's kind of like about. But anyway, keeping it moving. So Johns initiated the process, but the process was magnified and carried out by executives from the former regime before Greg Silverman. So when BVS didn't make the success that was projected by Greg Silverman, he expected it to make $1.5 billion from all their estimates and stuff. And it started off that way. It started off with a tremendous amount of money, and then in the second week it collapsed some. But the thing about BVS that people don't understand is it was a coordinated effort by the executive arm of Warner Brothers to sabotage the movie within Warner Brothers. So this is why the critical rating and everything, they didn't care. The executives in Warner Brothers weren't trying to defend the movie. They weren't trying to defend the bashing that was happening to the movie. No. Because they sided with Jeff Johns. All right. And then after BVS, they were now able to course correct Suicide Squad. They took David Ayer's movie again at last minute notice. You know, his movie made it to Comic-Con. David Ayer probably finished his shooting, and then they got this trailer park. It's not trailer park, but the trailer making company to redo the movie and seize the movie from David Ayer. This is why the Ayer cut is so important that we get, okay, today. Why I'm emphasizing all these things is because I want you guys to understand that it's an endemic thing in the company now. The company is rampant with executives who are just money hungry, and they don't really care about what they put out, because the company has a policy that it's all, you get bonuses for putting out movies. So they don't give a damn about the audience. They don't care about them. So anyway, Jeff Johns was elevated to the head of DC, which is exactly the position he wanted to be in. Now he runs everything, he controls everything, and he put pressure on Zack Snyder, got Zack Snyder out of there because his daughter was killed, Autumn Snyder. I don't even want to go into that because I do believe those people had something to do with it. Whether it's, you know, mental pressure that was put on the young lady because of what was happening to her dad. But I do feel that they are somewhat responsible for her death, but that's another story for another day. The point is, they got rid of Zack Snyder for Justice League, and then they were able to do, Jeff Johns was able to do exactly what he wanted to do. He changed up some, when Patty Jenkins, talking about Patty Jenkins fighting against the executive arm, Jeff Johns was the one trying to get the guy's a snake, man. He'll do as if he's your friend. He's talking to Patty Jenkins and everything, but he's the one that's working with the executives behind Patty Jenkins' back to make sure she doesn't have the no man land scene. The guy's an evil guy, man. The guy's a dirty, dirty guy. He's a snake. He'll talk one way to you, to your face, and then he'll throw you under the bridge, which is what he was going to do with Patty Jenkins. And that's what he did. He finally succeeded in doing that with Patty Jenkins' Wonder Woman 84. And Patty Jenkins knows what happened, but she's not saying. But Jeff Johns two-timed her. Anyway, back to what we were saying. So I need an extra 10 minutes. So this video will take about an hour. All right. So Jeff Johns and John Berg was the other executive that was with Jeff Johns. But John Berg really wasn't in it like those other executives. Then you have Toby Emmerich that came on the scene. He suddenly was the head of DC after they fired Greg Silverman. Toby Emmerich came from New Line Cinema. Toby Emmerich is another guy in the cabal that's there. So when we talk about flops, we're talking about Jeff Johns, Toby Emmerich, Walter Hamada, and Sarnoff. We're talking about people like James Gunn, Peter Safran. We're talking about people from the former regime, as well as Casey Bloys, who's hired in HBO. Casey Bloys actually was one of the people at HBO Max who was responsible and should have handled the issue with the Snyder Cut being released with the Tom and Jerry issue. I believe Casey Bloys had something to do with that. It wasn't just Toby Emmerich. Okay? Now, all of those guys seem like they're gone, including Joss Whedon, but Joss Whedon's been doing work for Warner Brothers for the longest while. He's just been doing it in quiet, in the shadows, just like how Jeff Johns, like I said before, you see his name written all over these flops, these recent flops of movies. He's a writer there, or he's doing something because he's still controlling DC that way. It's a collection of them. And Jeff Johns is friends with Kevin Feige. And Kevin Feige was on the WB lot with James Gunn. So I'm trying to tell you, Kevin Feige's also involved in that. All right. I want you to understand what's going on. They're sabotaging the DC brand. All right. So Jeff Johns can't run nothing for crap. Okay. James Gunn has never run a universe. So we got guys who don't know their head from their foot leading DC, whereas you have a guy that's building worlds. He's doing the Army of the Dead world. He's doing right now Rebel Moon world. He's showing why he should be the head of DC in Zack Snyder. He's showing it, and he has successfully run these worlds. on Netflix, showing you why Christopher Nolan was so correct and why Jeff Johns should never have been part of the equation. Now, how did Jeff Johns get into the equation after Man of Steel? Jeff Johns ended up in the equation after Man of Steel because Zack Snyder's critical rating wasn't high. And Warner Bros. Wants to have everything. They want to have high critical rating. They want to have high profit. They want high everything. So you saw Jeff Johns chirping away in BVS, but behind Zack's back, he was stabbing him. All right. Now, I wanted to say that Justice League 2017 was the first flop. And not only that, it signaled the fact that the fans began to see what was up. And I remember very early in the game, a lot of Snyder fans was talking about how Jeff Johns was the guy that was sabotaging Zack Snyder. And it proved to be true. All right. And there were some fans of Jeff Johns who didn't want to hear that. And Jeff's a good writer. He's a good writer. Nobody's saying no. But where he is right now, trying to run movies and direct movies and lead movies, that's not his MO. You will never see Jim Lee go across and try and run movies. He's a comic book writer. He's an illustrator. I mean, he's not trying to do that. You have to stay in your lane. And Jeff Johns didn't know how to stay in his lane. He was power hungry. And almost every production this guy has done has flopped because he's always trying to do something. You know, you look at the CW, not profitable. That's why they had to close it down. Okay, they put some of the stuff, the material on HBO Max, and they're selling off all kinds of really good property that HBO Max has. It's just because David Zaslav don't know his head from his butt when it comes to these things, right? And David Zaslav is equally as responsible. He needs to go. He needs to go. The only two people I tell you that make any sense in Warner Brothers right now, and I'm talking Warner Brothers, I'm not even talking DC, is Pat Abdi and Mike DeLuca. Those are the only two people that make any kind of sense. Okay, any kind of sense whatsoever. Because they actually listen to the audience. They actually listen to the fans. And Greg Silverman said, you have to listen to the audience. You need to listen to your fans. And they're not doing that right now. The studio is not doing that. And it's an executive decision to behave that way. And so these guys have to go. So what can we do to ensure that Warner Brothers gets cleaned from the top to the bottom? Well, thankfully, there's a strike going on. And the strike is showing us how much these executives have been sucking the system dry and giving nothing for it, particularly in Warner Brothers. Warner Brothers, we have creatives who they've wrecked creatives' careers. Ezra Miller's careers is not doing too well. You know, his public image is not doing too well. And again, that's based on the executives. The executives never tried to protect them. Executives are supposed to facilitate. They're supposed to protect the creatives. And that is not what these guys are doing. These guys don't know their head from their butt, like I said before. And they're not doing a good job of being executives. So they need to go. Now, this is the weirdest thing. Greg Silverman, just because he gave an inflated figure for BVS, he had to go. And he was moved out of the scenes very quickly. Showing you again Jeff Johns and his cabal. We're the guys running the show. Right now, you can't get rid of these disgusting blights from DC. They're a blight to DC, but they're not moving. You got to fire these people. I'm going to tell you what we need to do as fans. We need to appeal to the shareholders of AT&T, not to Discovery, because Discovery shareholders are going to side with David Zaslav. We got to appeal to the AT&T shareholders. We also need to appeal to the Senate and all of the senators out there to look at the Judicial Committee and do an investigation into the merger between Warner Brothers Discovery, Warner Brothers and Discovery, because as we all know, they lied about the number of subscriptions and they lied about the stock value, Toby Emmerich and Company, and there are shareholders right now suing them for this. So that's a controversial merger to start with. And then the other thing is, we also as fans need to speak to Abdi and DeLuca. We need to direct it to Warner Brother Pictures. The head of Warner Brother Pictures, they're trying to do the best they can. They've dialed back on how many films they do a year because they don't have enough money for that. But Abdi and DeLuca have been reasonable people. We have seen them allow Zack Snyder to do his SnyderCon, and they financed it as well. So they're good people, and I think those are the people we need to speak to. They really come from Lionsgate, so they're not really of the Warner Brothers culture and stuff like that. They have been treated badly by David Zaslav. David Zaslav just kicked them out the job, started put James Gunn in there, and James Gunn's been have been doing absolutely nothing for the payment that he's been getting as an executive. Every single movie has been flopping. He has not motivated the fan base. He has talked ill about the fan base, particularly the Snyder fans in the fan base who've been vocal on Twitter. Instead of trying to make peace with them, he's been trying to make war. And his movies are going to flop because, as I said before, all of these movies that have been flopping have been following the failed Justice League 2017 model. We as fans also, therefore, can push Abdi DeLuca to look at restoring the Snyderverse through releasing the Snyder Cut through the strike period in October. Why this is important and why October is because Rebel Moon is going to come out, I believe, in December. Therefore, it's a good enough time, about 2 months window between that and Rebel Moon. What Abdi and DeLuca will have the opportunity to do, I don't know how they're going to convince David Zaslav of that, but there's something that could save their company at least, is this movie will do well in cinemas. The reason being, it's such in demand. People have been asking to restore the Snyderverse. They want a sequel to this movie. The fact that the Flash movie flopped so badly, it did so poorly, it will remind people why the Flash is such a great character, because that is the prime feature of the Snyder Cut. You know, in fact, it won a Oscar fan favorite award. Regardless of whether people try to, bring up a controversy again, Jeff Johns and they probably behind that nonsense. But the anti-Snyder people out there who, seem to have hate for Zack Snyder are usually executives with burner accounts on Twitter. So be mindful that there are executives on Twitter who have been surfing Twitter. They're not doing their damn jobs. Instead, they're surfing Twitter trying to make wars with fans. Okay, so just bear that in mind. There are also fans who are anti-Snyder, but for the most part, people paid by Warner Brothers to keep this narrative alive are the people that you're seeing. These are people who are paid to do this. Okay, and so just be mindful of that. Now, but what we need to do is continue to press restore the Snyderverse, because we are making a case more and more over time. The public is seeing that restore the Snyderverse is the way to go. Not only did the public chime in 2 years ago in 2021 and made that hashtag, a record hashtag on Twitter for any movie in Hollywood, but now we only continue to gain support. We only continue to gain strength. This is inevitable that this is going to happen, whether it is that Warner Brothers is bought out by Comcast or Amazon or Netflix or Paramount, or one of those studio companies buy it out, and they clean the whole slate. You got to just clean out those executives, all of them, and start afresh with fresh executives. Particularly, I think executives that understand the audience that come to see these DC movies. I can think of Greg Silverman, rehiring him. That might be a good idea. If it's Comcast, we know that Christopher Nolan may have some part to play in that, as well as Zack Snyder. If it's Netflix, depends. Again, you have Greg Silverman there, excellent guy. He has his own company and everything. You have Zack Snyder there. You also have some other great directors like the Russos and so on that, they can work together with. Even if the Russos are doing Marvel movies, it might be good to have them on board. It's just having successful directors, whether it's Martin Scorsese or whoever it is. Just have successful directors there with a track record, and then directors who actually know how to world build, like Zack Snyder. So, Deborah Snyder also is an executive. Of course, you need to keep Charles Robin. Charles Robin's a guy who has been very, very faithful, even though the movies are putting out flops. Charles Robin's there to support the DC brand. You got to give Charles Robin a lot of credit for that, at least. So what I'm saying is that we need more people who are really true lovers of film, and less people who are involved who don't know about film, but they want to, exert their power, which is really stupid. If you're a lover of film, you'll let the creatives do what they do. You'll trust the creatives, like Greg Silverman did with Christopher Nolan, with Zack Snyder. And even with Jeff Johns, and with Bryan Singer, and with the other director of the Green Lantern Corps, he allowed the creatives to do what they do. Just that Jeff Johns overstepped his bounds as a creative, and even then, Greg Silverman allowed them to do what they wanted to do with the Green Lantern. He allowed them to do what they wanted to do with Superman Returns, right? It wasn't about being dark and gritty for everything. He allowed the creators to do it, and they would live and die by their creativity. And that's always the best way, because sometimes the creators really have a lot to say. The problem with this, of course, is the agenda in Hollywood is controlled by, the CIA. And so they will always, with these superhero movies, want to push their propaganda. But having said that, Zack Snyder somehow, some way got true to say his piece out there, and Christopher Nolan as well. And so all I would say to you as fans out there, and people who are concerned, and up at this hour, 12:18 in the night, I'm going an hour and 6 minutes now, is you have a part to play. Obviously, this is a boycott time, so we're not really going to be watching much movies from Warner Brothers. They're strapped for cash, and then this strike is not going to help them any bit, because now they can't even put out movies, so they can't even make the money that they need to. The investors are going to be very mad. AT&T investors are livid. I know a couple of investors who are very angry, and they have spoken with me, and they want David Zaslav fired. But it's not just David Zaslav. You have to remove the coop and caboodle of almost all the executives in Warner Brothers, save your money, and stop paying those guys, because they're not producing for the amount of money that they're being paid. And David Zaslav is being paid 4 times what top executives are being paid. So he's not doing anything to show that he's really getting the brand up and what he says. So instead of these guys sucking your currency dry, get rid of them. Whether you need to form another merger with another company and divorce yourself from Discovery, and start afresh. And Jeff Johns, try to keep that guy at bay, because that guy, he seems to influence executives, but not just him. You have to deal with a bunch of executives that think like that. So when you clean house, stick with creators and people, and you may have to ISO out these guys, because Jeff Johns keeps on worming his way back into situations. And this guy, really, we don't need this guy overstepping his bounds. He's just, most he should be is a consultant if necessary, but he should not be an executive giving notes to creatives. This is why these movies all look the same. This is why these movies are flopping, because the creatives are not getting to express themselves. With the Black Adam, that was just a corporate movie by committee. It was terrible. All right, The Flash, same thing, terrible. Andy Muschietti did not get to really truly express himself. The director of The Flash, again, an unknown kind of guy, he didn't get to express himself. And this is what they do at Marvel, but this doesn't work for DC. It just does not work for DC. So what are we doing? We are looking at, continue to talk about the Snyderverse as an alternative. Definitely, we speak louder and louder now, because the stock for Warner Brothers is dipped a little bit again. It's I think it closed at $12 or close to $11, if it's not $11. The stock has dipped again. So we are looking at, not as fans, because there's nothing that interests us anyway. We're not going to buy into James Gunn's DCU. Why? Because he's going to give more of the same. He's not going to give anything different. He's going to give you more of the same. And we're not going to also support any Warner Brothers related project. Now, Leroy Kahn was talking about the animated arm of Warner Brothers and supporting that, but I'm not going to do that. Now, he can do it if he wants to, but I'm not supporting, I'm not paying for anything that Warner Brothers puts out until this given regime is cleared. So we want to starve them out of making any kind of money for any kind of entertainment. And the reason, I mean, this is not hard to do because I don't think anybody's the only movie I'm interested in Warner Brothers, to be honest with you, this year is Doom. And Dennis Villeneuve is a hell of a director. And it breaks my heart that I won't be able to see Doom 2 in theaters. But I'm going to say I'm willing to take that sacrifice because the strike's on and everything anyway. And I am willing to not watch Doom 2, not watch it at all, you know, for the benefit of us as fans speaking out and saying, no, this is wrong. What's happening in this studio? Y'all need to clean house. We support the shareholders and saying, if you guys can't make anything profit, then we're not watching anything. If you're not going to give us something that interests us, we're not watching anything. And I think that's the way it has to be. People are talking about, you see the media saying, oh, well, there's a lost interest in comic book movies. Well, if that's really so, Abdi and DeLuca released the Snyder Cut in the cinemas globally. Let's see if that's true. This, mind you, is a movie that people have seen. This, mind you, is a movie that people, yes, they campaign for and everything, but they know how it begins and they know how it ends, right? So if you put this movie into cinemas, are people coming to see the movie to know what it is? No. Are people going into cinemas to see this movie because it brings something new? No. People are going to go into the cinema to see this movie because they want to see it on the biggest possible screen possible. That's what's going to happen. And not only that, but you have to understand it's a statement. It will show a statement. Now, this is why Abdi and DeLuca needs to do this. Now, I don't know if they get fired for it, but they're going to be heroes. This movie, the executives at Warner Brothers do not want to be put into theaters because they know exactly what will happen if it goes into theaters. It will be extremely successful. They know this. So by all means, they don't want it to happen. But if it's so-called superhero ethnic fatigue, sorry, not ethnic fatigue, but superhero fatigue, let's see if that's true. I saw pieces of the Flash movie on Twitter. The scene with the Flash saving babies from a collapsing hospital. I'm going to tell you, quite frankly, it was cringe. What is the difference between cringe and something that can be funny? Cringe is something where they're striving to tell a joke. They're striving to make it funny, but the execution's so poor that you're like, oh. I've seen comedians tell jokes, which by all ways and means, you should be saying, oh my God, did he really say that? But because they know how to, the proper timing and humor, they get it across. Because it's not comedians writing these scripts, but executives saying, I think this is what is funny, or some guy from Marvel who's writing down ideas he thinks is funny. It ends up being horrible. Okay? You're making a movie that you say is for kids, but then when you look at it, it's cringe. Like the stuff that you're doing in the movie is cringe. But you're trying to make it funny, right? You say these are jokes and whatever, but you can't even tell jokes properly. You want it to be so much a Marvel movie. We got executives who never made a movie in their life, giving advice about what they think is funny at a discussion table. And the creators have to do that. That's what's going on at Warner Brothers. So what Jeff Johns did was give the people who are not qualified, just like himself, not qualified, a say in the creative process, ruining it. So when I say that I blame the executive arm, for what is happening in Warner Brothers. I blame them, and they need to go. They are responsible for why that is happening, and their time is up. And the shareholders need to make a vote, and they get a simple majority, and all of them need to go. The only executives I think that should stay are Abdi and DeLuca, as far as I know. There may be more, and hopefully they don't lose their jobs. But the main people, the top people, need to go. So that's James Gunn, Peter Safran, all of them. David Zaslav, get rid of them. Right? Casey Bloys, all of them. Just get rid of them. Because their ideas and their supposedly creative decisions are horrible. They're awful. Their movies are awful. And I don't really care that you pay the critics, because they're paying the critics to make fluff pieces and to say, oh, this movie was great and whatever. But because you can pay different news outlets and stuff to write articles for you. That's what Warner Bros. Has been doing forever. Okay, but obviously, nobody's buying that Kool-Aid anymore, and people are not going to be manipulated as before. And so all of that, you trying to spin it that Blue Beetle is doing very well and blah blah blah, and Barbie, the Barbie movie coming out is going to make unprecedented, debut and stuff. You can spin how much you want. It still has to meet the theaters. People still have to go see it, and we'll know the truth when it's time to see the truth. So all your spin is still going to have to face reality at the end of the day. And that movie's going to flop just like all the other movies out there. It's going to flop. And those executives are going to be primarily responsible. Whereas you could have had the responsibility on the creatives because you gave them creative freedom. And then they live and die by their sword. And that's where their reputation comes. Now you're ruining the creative's reputation, and you're ruining the company's reputation. And you're doing it consistently. Where you should have been gone. Greg Silverman did way less than you. And you're still around, man, get out of here. Get out of here. Get them all out. Clean it out. So if they don't want to leave, we're going to make sure they make no money at all. None. And that investors don't want to invest in their company, and their stock will plummet, and then they'll have to sell. So that's what will happen. And that's how we're moving. I am Christ's same disciple. So our appeal is to Abdi and DeLuca, and or movements are constantly to still remind people of this. This is why this video is even there. You guys can share this video. You can share videos like this. I'm not the be all and end all for Snyder fandom. I'm just one of many, but we need to keep on making more videos of this, and as regularly as possible, and turn up the ante even more. Thank God for the strike. Are those of you backing those people who are striking? I am also with you guys 100%. The exploitation of the creatives in Hollywood has to come to an end. And, their reliance on AI to try and bail them out so they can make their own stories and try and brainwash people into their way of thinking is not going to happen either. We hope that the engine for propaganda is going to break down. People are getting smarter. They're getting wiser to what's going on. These are not kids. These are grown people. The people you're paying to have these uh, you know, try to influence people's opinions and mindsets. It's not working. It's backfiring, and it will continue to backfire. A multi-billion-dollar company like Warner Brothers should know that people, once they make up their mind, they're not going to change it. And if you make us the enemy, then we'll be your enemy, because we don't have a problem being that. Because guess what? We are giving our money to you. So we save money by not giving money to you. So we're cool with saving our money. By the way, Oppenheimer is coming out very soon. Don't forget to go to the cinema and support Oppenheimer. There's another movie I like to tell you guys about before I get out of here. It's called Sisu. Check it out. SISU. Sisu is a good movie. It's very violent, but it's actually based on a historical story about a Finnish uh, gentleman who discovered gold, and the German military was trying to take it from him. And you can go ahead and check out that whole story. It's kind of like John Wick. It came out last year. It didn't make a lot of money in the US, but nonetheless, it's something you should check out. I truly highly advise it. And for those of you also, independent films, maybe a lot of actors may go into independent films, indie films, and work with indie film companies, of which Greg Silverman is one of them. He has an indie film company. Mark Ruffalo was talking about it, and that's a good thing for, of course, Matt Damon and Ben Affleck have their own indie company as well. Check those guys out. I'm going to catch you guys later. I am Christ, I am disciple. It's very late. It's 12:33 in the night. I took an hour and 21 minutes and 38 seconds. God bless you all. Have a good night. I'm going to see you guys later. Peace. If you guys want more of this, just put a suggestion in the comments when this stream comes out, or you can put a suggestion if you want to have more of these videos. And you guys can also talk with me. Again, I had the link there. Nobody came in as guests. That's okay, but free up yourselves. I'll try and be more frequent with these videos. The other thing I want to promote is on my boxing channel is Spence versus Crawford. That's a boxing fight you don't want to miss. And you guys can have a watch party, put the monies together, and buy it on pay-per-view. I'll catch you guys later. I am what you need. God bless you all. God be with you all. Peace. I'm out.